Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Public Space. I'm very excited for today's episode because we have E. Michael Jones on the podcast. E. Michael Jones is one of the most knowledgeable authors on Catholic civilization, Christian civilization, and its relation with the Jewish people. Dr. Jones, how are you doing today?
Good to be here.
All right. It was a revelation to me to be reading the Jewish revolutionary spirit, because I had been thinking about these questions for a long time, and I was introduced to Kevin MacDonald's work, and there were a few missing answers. That there were a few things that I wasn't clear about how could we get to the state of the Jewish people today? How did they get selected to be different? And as a biologist, I was looking for these answers into what kind of pressure has been applied from the origin of the Jewish people to today that made them different, that could have selected for certain characteristics, or that could have introduced certain cultural elements. And the Jewish revolutionary spirit is a complete book about that. And so for those who do not have a copy of it, I've left the description below in the YouTube video. The Jewish revolutionary spirit is a book that addresses the question of how could Jewish people have a different behavior? How did they get selected differently? How did their culture converge toward a different culture than the rest of Western civilization? And in particular, you talk of essentially the Jewish people is defined as a rejection rather than positively defined. What defines Jewishness is essentially the rejection of Jesus Christ, right?
Yes, they have no positive identity. Their identity is the rejection of Christ, and we know from the Gospels that Christ is the Logos, which is the Greek word for the order of the universe. St. John used this word when he wrote the Gospel in Ephesus. 500 years before St. John wrote that Gospel, Heraclitus was in Ephesus, and he used the word Logos as the order of the universe. And then he talked about fire as the order of the universe in action. And St. John adopted that philosophical language in order to introduce Jesus Christ to the Greek-speaking world, after St. Paul had failed to introduce Jesus Christ to the Greek-speaking world in the speech that he gave before the Areopagus. So he's the Logos, and the Logos is the order of the universe. It's the social order. And when the Jews rejected Jesus Christ, they rejected that social order in some type of dramatic and permanent fashion, and that meant that they became revolutionaries. And this revolutionary behavior, it didn't take but 30 years before the revolutionary behavior broke out in earnest with the rebellion against Rome. It was crushed, and then it happened again 60 years after that rebellion with Simon Bar Kokhba, and at that point it was crushed again.
So in what years are we talking about the rejection of Rome?
The temple was destroyed in 70 A.D. during the first rebellion, which ended with the zealots, the Jews committing suicide at Masada. 60 years later, Simon Bar Kokhba orchestrated another rebellion, which succeeded in driving the Romans out of Palestine. They were so successful, they even got to make their own coins with Bar Kokhba on the coin. But the Romans returned, and it just took them back one city after another. It's very simple. You put a siege around the city, you starve them to death, they collapse, and finally they were back to Jerusalem again. And at this point, the rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai got himself smuggled out of Jerusalem in a shroud, and he created the Jewish religion, the new Jewish religion, which is the religion of the synagogue and the Talmud, which is the Jewish scripture to this day. But it was born in revolution, and revolution then became a permanent feature of the Jewish people to this day.
Absolutely. This is fascinating because one of the questions that I had no clue how to answer it is this whole cultural Marxism attitude of today in the Jewish people, and this whole idea of rejection of concepts, of destruction of knowledge rather than accumulation of knowledge, this kind of revolutionary attitude. And now I find an explanation in your book because 2000 years ago, a big selection event happened in the countries from Europe to North Africa, which is that people were confronted to a choice to accept Jesus Christ and join a form of Christian civilization, or to reject it. And those who were selected as rejecting the kind of authority that God and that its human incarnation on earth would have offered to them. They rejected it, and therefore they were probably selected for having brains, for having genes of revolution. Would that be your hypothesis?
No, I feel like Laplace here now. I don't need that hypothesis. I don't need the biological hypothesis here. This is transmitted independently of biology. This is transmitted through the Jewish people, through things like the Talmud, for example, through the synagogue, but also through family, passing information down from generation to generation. If you look at the contemporary situation, and you see this American kind of animosity toward Russia, where is it coming from? Where is it coming from? It's coming from the Jews, whose grandparents moved from Russia to here after the pogroms of the late 19th century, and these people have been told stories after story about how these Russians, the Tsar did this, the Tsar did that, the Russians did this, and so on and so forth, and it prepared the ground for basically another takeover of United States foreign policy. Okay, beginning with Victoria Nuland, the Jewish lady who orchestrated the coup d'etat in the Ukraine. That was, anytime it looks as if peace is going to break out in the world, there's some Jewish operative who makes sure that war breaks out instead of peace. This has been recent history. The reason I wrote this book is because I watched my country get dragged into a war in 2003 by a small group of Jews who were known as neoconservatives. Well, I considered myself a conservative. So what do I have in common with this group of people that calls itself neoconservatives? Well, who were these people? Well, one of them was Irving Kristol. As a matter of fact, he was called the father of neoconservatism. But in the 1930s, he was a Trotskyite. Well, how can you be a Trotskyite and a conservative? What's the common denominator here? Well, it's the Jewish revolutionary spirit. That's what the common denominator is. And if you try and locate it at a particular spot on the political spectrum, you're always going to fail. You'll never understand what's going on. That was the lesson of Irving Kristol.
Absolutely, and your book is fascinating on this because you show that there is a tension within the Jewish people between rationality, between maintaining an ideological system that would have been rational and that would have been clearly identified as left or right, or other forms of rationality. But you say this has failed largely, and this has died with the medieval conception of Judaism. Is that correct?
Well, in my book, I talk about Shabbatai Zevi. Shabbatai Zevi was the Jewish Messiah. The Jews are always they keep looking for messiahs and they find them periodically. And Shabbatai Zevi was a Jew who his family had been expelled from Spain. They went to Turkey. He was living in Turkey in a Jewish kind of Spanish environment. And he decided that he was the Messiah. He would travel around. He got a huge following among the Jewish people, including the Jews in Europe. The synagogues in Europe all declared for him as the Messiah. Jews were selling their property for a song and traveling to Turkey because this was going to be the beginning of the reign of the Jews once again. And so he's all enthused about it. He sails to Constantinople, to Istanbul. And the caliph captures them and offers them the option of either becoming a Muslim or having his archers shoot arrows at him. Now, if you're the true Messiah, these arrows won't hurt you, he said. So you don't have to have any fear. But if you're not quite sure about that, you could become a Muslim. At this point, Shabbatai Zevi becomes a Muslim. The Messiah just became a Muslim. Wait a minute. This was a catastrophe for the Jewish people across the world. Every synagogue was in a state of crisis. The biggest catastrophe, says the Jewish Encyclopedia, since the destruction of the temple. And this cataclysm basically caused a split within the Jews. There were certain Jews, the Hasids, who just withdrew from public life completely, and they withdrew into the shtetls of the Pale of the Settlement, and they just wanted to be left alone. And there are still Jews like that out there. I was in Iran, in Mashhad in May, and I met Rabbi David Weiss, who was there. He's a member of Neturei Karta, and they think that Zionism is a terrible idea. They're completely anti-Zionist Jews. They just want to be left alone. And I said at the conference, I said, look, if all the Jews were like Rabbi Weiss, we wouldn't have a problem. But unfortunately, the Jews are not like Rabbi Weiss, okay? They have this revolutionary spirit that they can't get rid of. And I said, the only reason that we in America, or you in Iran now, don't have a nuclear agreement is because of three rich Jews, Sheldon Adelson, Paul Singer, and Bernard Marcus, who made big contributions to the Trump campaign. And now we have three rich Jews running our foreign policy. This is not American, okay? This is not what America is supposed to stand for. But this is the situation that came about because those Jews do not have the dominant position. The Jews that in the Pale of the Settlement, they're living there in the shtetl with these side by side with the Hasids, and suddenly these new ideas start filtering in from the West. They're now on the western border of Russia. Before, when they were in Poland, they were on the eastern border of Poland. Now they're western border of Russia, and all of the ideas, new inventions, go through the shtetl first before they reach Russia. And so suddenly they come across these new ideas like Marxism, communism, socialism, and they're swept away. A certain group is swept away. To a lesser extent, by the end of the 19th century, they're starting to hear new ideas like Zionism. So one is Jewish internationalism, one is Jewish nationalism, but they're both revolutionary movements. They're both revolutionary movements that seek to overthrow the social order. And the Jews succeeded in doing exactly that in Russia with Bolshevism.
Absolutely. It's quite stunning. It's quite stunning when you... Oh, go ahead.
I'm trying to say not every Bolshevik was a Jew, but Bolshevism could not have succeeded without Jewish leadership and without the protective sanctuaries in the shtetl of the Pale of the Settlement. Every time the Tsar and his secret police, the Okhrana, tried to crack down on the Jews, they would disappear into the shtetls of the Pale of the Settlement, and the Russians could not find them. So it could not have succeeded. Bolshevism, the Russian Revolution, could not have succeeded without this Jewish participation. And here we have a glowing example, a prime example of the Jewish revolutionary spirit breaking out, taking over a country, and causing havoc throughout the world for about 70 years.
Absolutely. It's stunning because when I was young, I was very naive and I was looking at neocons, those neocons that were pushing for war. And I thought those were just white Christians. And then you realize that there is a lot of pressure in the media, independently from beliefs in left or right of the political spectrum. In Jewish media, there is a lot of pressure for maintaining a state of Cold War or outright war. Why is it that the Jewish media has interest? Is it just their way of being? Is it just the revolutionary spirit that's in them? Or do you think that there are interest in maintaining America in a state of war that doesn't seem to be in its interest?
Well, I'm old enough to remember the 1960s. And at that point, the Jews were the leaders of the peace movement. So they were pacifists at that point. You can't locate them with any particular political content. It's impossible to do that. So what was the Jewish interest at that point? Well, the Jewish interest at that point was the civil rights movement, which was a war against the South in the United States of America. So basically, it wasn't that they were pacifists. They were for war if the war served their interest, and the Vietnam War did not serve their interest, so they were against it. So, but as I said before, you can't locate these people at any particular point. It's like Heisenberg's principle of uncertainty here, in the political realm. You can locate them. The only common denominator I'm saying that they have is this Jewish revolutionary spirit. And it'll depend on the circumstances, how it expresses itself. So what was the Kavanaugh hearings about? The Supreme Court hearings, well, that's a Catholic Jewish battle. And it's basically over abortion. And abortion was a Jewish revolutionary movement, part of feminism that came into power during the 1970s. You just have to understand. You can't understand what's going on unless you understand a concept like the Jewish revolutionary spirit, because it is the fundamental axis of history, which is basically the forces of logos against the forces of anti-logos. That is history. That is the armature of history. And if you don't understand that, you're never going to understand what's going on.
Absolutely stunning. And yes, indeed, it is a set of ideas that once you integrate them, everything starts making sense, stuff that didn't make sense before. You explained the subversive aspect within Jewish culture, this idea of projecting stuff, deceiving about other stuff in certain media, and the way the elites control the media. Could you take us through what could have led to this subversive nature?
Well, the subversive nature is there. It's always been there. The Jews in Europe, at a certain point during the 19th century, after Napoleon emancipated the Jews, okay, they now had an ability to take over large segments of the culture, largely through usury. Finance was one of the main weapons in the 19th century, and the Rothschild family used this to basically take over England during this period of time. After the Napoleonic Wars, the English felt so good about themselves, they all ran out and built big country houses for themselves. And in order to do that, they had to borrow money, and the Rothschilds were there. Nathan was there to lend them money all the way up through the 19th century. And what you had was the English aristocracy becoming burdened with debt, unrepayable debt, and then losing all their property. It was being taken over by the Jews. The classic example of this was the Churchill family. So Randolph Churchill, Winston's father, died 80,000 pounds in debt to Natty Rothschild. He used to visit him, play there as a child, loved going over to the Jewish houses because they always had something good to eat. Ended up dying 80,000 pounds in debt. Now, Natty is portrayed as the great humanitarian because he forgave the debt, but what people fail to realize is he forgave the debt in order to bring Winston Churchill under his control, and that's precisely what happened. Churchill was a man of extravagant taste, could never stay out of debt, and at every crucial moment during his life, the Jews were there to bail him out. And that's how they maintained control over Winston Churchill, and that's how they maintained control over British foreign policy during this period of time. That's one way, okay? Usury is a powerful way to insinuate yourself into the ruling class and take it over. If you want to talk about the other way, it is the subversion of the morality of the majority people. Okay, now the Jews have been involved in this during the same period of time. There was a kind of Jewish system in place in every major city in Europe where the young aristocrat would show up in town and the Jews would show him a good time and introduce him to gambling and to prostitution. This is a good way to lose money, but the Jew was always there to lend this guy money when he ran through his fortune, and of course they took over one estate after another during this way. By the end of the 19th century, everyone was complaining about the so-called Jewish question. Everyone was writing about it, especially in France. France was especially vocal in this regard. And this forced the Catholic Church to take a stand on it itself. And it was basically, came out in Civiltà Cattolica, which is the official journal of the Catholic Church, created in the 1850s as a bulwark against revolutionary activity in Europe. And in the fall of 1890, there was a 3-part series on the Jewish question in Civiltà Cattolica, which was basically written on the 100th anniversary of the French Revolution. And the question was, what has Europe gained, or what has France gained after 100 years of revolution? And the answer is very clear. They ended up being subjugated to the Jews. The conclusion was it's one of these stunning moments, where you read it and you're shocked by what you read. But this is the official organ of the Catholic Church saying, any country which turns away from laws created by Christian kings will end up being ruled by Jews. That is the Catholic Church saying that. The Pope Benedict's great uncle, Georg Ratzinger, wrote around the same time a book called Jüdisches Erwerbsleben, which has never been translated into English, in which he said that if the Christian leaders, rulers of Europe, do not enforce laws that have been created to protect the Christian population, namely laws against usury, for example, the rage that is building now among the German people will get so great that it will finally explode as soon as the German people find Ein Führer. That was his word. If there's ever been a more prophetic statement, I don't know what it is, because that's precisely what happened. So you see, every time here throughout history, whenever the church abdicates its responsibility to maintain the social order, the Jews fill the vacuum and they take over your culture, and that leads to violence. That's what happened then. That's what probably going to happen in the future here.
So that's a cycle, essentially. It's a historical cycle that keeps repeating itself. I don't know however many times it did happen, but is it your impression that we in America are part of this cycle of realization of the interaction between our Christian civilization and the Jewish people?
Yes. The example I can give is the shooting in the synagogue in Pittsburgh just recently. Now, you have to understand, no one can create a mass political movement in the United States without the approval of the oligarchs. You cannot do it here. The classic example was Occupy Wall Street, a genuine grassroots movement of young people who had a legitimate grudge against the system. They're all $80,000 in debt for education, and they can't get jobs. This is a legitimate, and it was crushed basically by the FBI and by Wall Street. So when you do this, you're just suppressing something and creating more violence over the long run. So in Mashhad, I did this YouTube video. I was in Mashhad in May, and we're talking about the moving of the embassy, and we're watching behind us Israeli snipers shooting Palestinians, shooting women and children, shooting people running away, shooting journalists. And I thought at this time, you can't do this. You can't violate the moral law in this flagrant manner and not expect some type of retaliation or pushback. And I think that's precisely what happened in Pittsburgh. Now, I said this personally. I had a personal stake in this because for 10 years, the Jewish revolutionary spirit came out 10 years ago. And it's not just a description of 2,000 years of history. It is that, but it's also talks about the solution that the church found during this period of time, which is secret Judaeus non. And the first principle of secret Judaeus non is no one has the right to harm the Jew. The second principle is the Jew doesn't have any right to destroy your culture. Okay, so for 10 years, I have been saying no one has the right to harm the Jew, and I've been censored. The Jews who control YouTube censor my video as soon as it comes out, which means that I cannot reach people like this guy with the guns, this disturbed Marine veteran, and tell him no one has a right to harm the Jew. So I said, look, The ADL, you're responsible for the violence here. You're responsible, first of all, because you're censoring people like me, but secondly, you're responsible because of the lessons the Jews have been teaching everyone by this abominable behavior toward the Palestinians. Now, I said, look, if what they are doing, what the Jews, what the Israelis did is permissible, if that's okay, why is what this man did in Pittsburgh wrong? You can't have it both ways. If you're going to teach bloody instructions, as Shakespeare said, you better wait and don't be surprised when the chickens come home to roost and people in this violent culture pick up guns and start shooting people in synagogues.
Absolutely. Words and free speech are a way that in civilization we avoid violence. And by making certain subjects censored on the public space, we end up developing frustrations within people who are, of course, misguided, who may be mentally ill, but they perceive these things in society. They see, oh, these ideas that I have cannot be expressed, and therefore they resort to violence, because when words are unable to be used as a tool of expression, violence is their only conclusion that you can reach if you want to get out of a situation that you cannot denunciate. And so I'm with you on this. I believe that free speech is an important feature of a peaceful society.
Yes.
In your
So what happened in the aftermath here? Now there's more suppression of free speech than ever. Well, this is going to provoke more violence. And that more violence is going to have a greater crackdown. This is the revolutionary cycle that these people are creating here.
Absolutely. In the Jewish revolutionary spirit, you talk of the interaction between the Jewish people and the state. Is it correct, my impression, that essentially the effect of the Jewish community on the state is often a growing of the state and a recycling of the state tools to the purpose and for the advantage of the Jewish people in any societies they found themselves? Does the Jewish community has an effect of growth on the size of the state and the extent of its invasion on personal liberty?
Well, it depends. It depends on where the Jews are. If they are in an outsider position, they will work to weaken the state. Once they get control of the state, they will work to strengthen the state. It depends on where they are on the power calculus. You can't really judge. There's no one fixed position here that the Jews have on, I would say, on anything other than simply the Jewish people and revolution.
All right, very interesting. We have a couple reactions from the crowd. Skeptical Face says, is Depeche Mode singing "Words are like violence and very unnecessary" a type of degenerate non-logos romanticism like the Asharite Muslims? I don't know if you're familiar with this song from Depeche Mode, Dr. Jones?
No, I'm not. I'm not.
Okay.
It's after full time.
Well, essentially, it's a song that questions the sense of word and the use of words. And so I would say it's a good hypothesis. Skeptical Face. We have Lolas, who would like to hear about Julian the Apostate and the Third Temple.
Yes, the Jews were dispersed after the destruction of the temple and the Simon Bar Kokhba revolution. They were dispersed all over the Mediterranean basin. And did not go away. They were there. They were involved in the Arian crisis. Whenever there was an attempt to overthrow the order, they were involved in it. And any attempt to attack Christianity was an opportunity for them. So suddenly we have Julian the Apostate, the grandson of Constantine, who is the man who created toleration, who created the Catholicism as the official religion of the Roman Empire. Constantine had murdered Julian's parents, so he had this grudge against Christianity, which grew when he was at the academy in Athens, and finally came to full fruition when he became emperor through a series of miraculous events. There's no other word for saying this. He felt that he had been anointed, and there was probably some type of demonic assistance that led him to become the emperor. So he's emperor now. He's emperor. He's in Constantinople, and he's ready to take on the Persians. But he needs help here because it's a long supply chain to get to Ctesiphon, which is where he has to go. And the Jews are the only people who can help him. So he sits down and says, let's work together. And the Jews say, yes, let's work together. If you would do us a favor, we'll help you with your supply chain. And basically the favor was, we need you to rebuild the temple. Okay, Julian says, fine, let's rebuild the temple. I've got engineers. He calls on Alypius, who was his engineer, a famous engineer who was in England at the time. Alypius comes back, and everyone who was anyone, whether they were Catholic, whether they were Arian, whether they were pagan, all accepted the premises of this venture, which was basically, if the Jews can if they can rebuild the temple, this is proof that Jesus Christ was an imposter and that Christianity had failed. Everyone accepted that bet, no matter where they were on the spectrum. And so Alypius arrives. The Jews from all over the Mediterranean basin come. The women are giving their gold. They're carrying rubble away from the foundation in their aprons. It's finally the foundation is clear, and Alypius gets the crane to lower the cornerstone onto the foundation. And as soon as it touches the foundation, fire erupts from the earth and kills everyone. There are stories of the women running in horror from the place. There's a chapel there, a Christian chapel. They get to the chapel, the door slams shut, and there's a cross burnt on the front, and they get incinerated by fire coming down from heaven. Now, everyone said this. There is no question that this happened. The historical record is clear. Whether you're an Arian, whether you're a Christian, or whether you're a pagan, they all told the same story. And the Jews have been trying to suppress this information for centuries now. The fact of the matter is, Heinrich Graetz, the father of Jewish historiography, said it was underground gas deposits that exploded. That's kind of far-fetched, but it's better than the Jewish Encyclopedia, which says in typically Jewish fashion, no, that never happened. I'm sorry, but it did happen. And your ipse dixit is not going to change that fact. That's the basic story of Julian the Apostate.
Very interesting. Someone on the chat is asking if the shirt that you are wearing is a Notre Dame shirt.
It's a sweater.
Sweater, yeah.
I'm sure Notre Dame is going to complain, but my daughter brought me this sweater. She worked at Notre Dame. She brought me this sweater. It's a very nice sweater, and I'm sure Notre Dame would be proud to see me wearing it tonight.
Absolutely. It's from my understanding, it's a college or a university that has a very strong Christian orientation, right?
Yes, we could do a long program on Notre Dame and its attempt to have its cake and eat it too, claiming to be wanting respectability with the academic establishment and all the time claiming that it's Catholic at the same time. That is squaring the circle. They've been trying to square the circle for over 50 years now, ever since Father Hesburgh stole the university from the Catholic Church when he issued the Land O'Lakes statement in the summer of 1967. So that's a long, involved story, and I'd be happy to talk in as much detail as you want to go into it, but that may not be the main focus.
Well, it's an interesting question because as a PhD and someone who's been in the research field, I know that there is no such thing as gaining respect from the establishment and not submitting to Jewish academics. I've made my career from doctorate to up to high-level researcher internationally by satisfying Jewish researchers.
Yes. Well, the reason I live in South Bend, Indiana is because I was hired by St. Mary's College in 1979 as an assistant professor of American literature. And then I got fired 1 year later because I was against abortion. I keep saying, I tried to tell my doctoral advisor, I got fired because of abortion. They said, well, yeah, it's a Catholic college. I said, no, I was against abortion. Well, how is that possible? Well, it's possible because feminism had taken over St. Mary's College, and they run that place to this day. Feminism is a Jewish revolutionary movement. And basically, the Catholic Church allowed itself to be taken over by these revolutionary elements, and that's the situation today. Hasn't changed.
All right. The dashing rogue says, "Are the Ashkenazim Jews? If not, please explain why."
They are Jews, but they're not Semites.
All right.
The Genome Project has shown that they are a Turkic race. So there is no. My argument is not biological. Okay, so this doesn't change anything in terms of my argument. But their claim that they have somehow the DNA of Moses in their cells is preposterous. It's not true. Not true.
All right. Skeptical Face says, "Does Dr. Jones consider Darwinism itself to be a fable or hermetic magic with metaphysical claims, or is Darwinism a biological theory which is simply abused into being interpreted as metaphysics?"
That's good question. Good question. Let me state the simple case. Someone like Richard Dawkins is a metaphysical and philosophical ignoramus, okay, who is trying to turn biology into metaphysics, and it does not work. It cannot work. This is the problem here. They're taking a biological theory, which may or may not be true. Which may or may not be true in the biological realm, but it is preposterous in the metaphysical realm. Okay, the principle here was articulated by Parmenides a long time ago, contemporary of Heraclitus, who said, that which is cannot come from that which is not. Okay, there are people, fellow ignoramuses like the late Christopher Hitchens, who talk, or Richard Dennett, I believe it's this Professor Dennett, anyway, who was the only philosopher among the group. And he said, the universe created itself. This is metaphysically preposterous. It cannot happen for the very simple reason that the universe would have to exist before it existed, which is impossible. So the universe cannot create itself. This is a type of metaphysical nonsense that these scientists, these so-called scientists, promote because they become intoxicated with Darwinism. Darwinism is the explanation of anything. Darwinism cannot explain the type of thing that we're talking about here. It is not metaphysics. Whether it's bad biology or good biology, that's another question.
All right, wonderful answer. David Pichada says, "Salut Jeff, I still haven't heard you speak French. Can you say a few French words for us?" Eh bien, j'apprécie grandement cette discussion avec Dr. E. Michael Jones. White Male says, "I heard that the Marxist philosopher Slavoj Zizek recently admitted that Hitler's analysis of Jewish power in Germany at the time he wrote Mein Kampf was mostly correct. It seems even leftist intellectuals cannot deny the JQ." Paddy McGill says, "Dr. Jones, I feel that European people are under threat. Can a return to Catholic European identity help ethnically European Americans? If so, how?"
A return to Catholic identity is the only thing that can save Europe now. That's the only thing that can save Europe. Europe is under assault. This mass migration is an assault on European identity. I could give you one Jew after another who explains it as precise as that, but Barbara Lerner Specter you can access her on YouTube and listen to what she says. And she's only one of many Jews who is saying that this migration is being orchestrated to destroy European identity. I personally experienced this growing up. It was black migration in Philadelphia that basically destroyed the Irish ethnic neighborhood that I grew up in and dispersed the Catholic population throughout the suburbs, which destroyed Catholic political power and began the long slide of the destruction of Catholic education as well. I cover this in my book, I cover this in my book, The Slaughter of Cities, Urban Renewal as Ethnic Cleansing, if you're interested in that story. Okay, why is this? Well, the Catholic Church is the vehicle of Logos. It's been the vehicle of Logos ever since St. John wrote his gospel. It's the only thing, Logos is the only thing that can save us against the forces of anti-Logos. now I've been a lot of these white nationalists have me on their shows probably because I talk about the Jews. But now there's this crisis. I mean, there's this crisis now, they're telling me, between Christian white guys and pagan white guys. Okay? What is a Christian? What is a white guy? What is a white guy? In my experience, a white guy is a Protestant who stopped going to church. And once he stopped going to church, there is this vacuum in his life that he's trying to fill with an obsolete ideology of race that simply cannot do this. Okay. Now, I did a show. There's a lady from Finland on the show, asking me questions. She is a classic example of what I'm talking about. Scandinavia is a classic example of the Protestants' looting operation, basically taking over their culture for a couple of centuries and then running out of gas. And then there's this vacuum that is now being created in all of these countries. And I'm including England in this as well. And so in the Scandinavian countries, you have the return of the white guy. It's Thor. He's going to put on that helmet with horns. And he's going to return us to the days when his ancestors were Vikings. In England, you have the exact opposite. You've got white guy, which by white guy, I mean a Protestant who doesn't go to church anymore. Now they're becoming Muslims in England. I can't tell you how many women I've met, English women I've met, who are talking about wearing the hijab now. I'm saying, look, we have to get straight here. The Reformation was a looting operation. There was no theological justification for the Reformation. In England, there was no justification, no theological justification whatsoever. It was just the king and the aristocrats looting church property. In Germany, you had a monk by the name of Luther who came up with a theological justification for what they were doing, but it was a looting operation. So they stole the property and they created a state church with threw a couple sops to the people as long as they kept the state church going. That is worn out. Protestantism has worn out. It ran out of gas. It's over. And the only place you can go is back to Logos, and that is the Catholic Church. So yes, the Catholic Church can be the vehicle for resurrection. The only place where I have succeeded, I think, in a significant way is Poland. And the only reason I succeeded there, and I'm saying by succeeded, I'm saying there's no gay marriage in Poland. It's never going to happen in Poland. And it's not my word, but it's basically an email I got from a Polish guy when I was in Argentina saying, between my book, the Polish translation of Libido Dominandi, Sexual Liberation and Political Control, and the Polish bishop's statement on gender ideology, between the two of us, we destroyed gay marriage in Poland. Now, that's not to say the Poles don't have problems with gender ideology, but no time in any way, shape, or form are the Poles ever going to vote for gay marriage. It's dead. We killed it. I went on Polish TV and I said, anyone who promotes gay marriage is a traitor to the Polish people and should be treated as such. Okay? The fact of the matter is that never would have succeeded if the Polish bishops had thrown me under the bus during that night at the beginning of the book tour for Libido Dominandi. So I'm saying it can work, and the more solidarity we have, the more successful we're going to be.
Very interesting. The chat is cheering your enthusiasm and your energy, and they're like, wow, this guy is completely destroying JF, and they do expect me to push back on this idea of race not being important. Because I think that race is important. I think that genetics are important, and they are particularly important when you develop a theory of people independent of the religion that they carry. For example, I believe that race science can allow us to understand the Jewish spirit, even in the absence of an explicit rejection of Christ, or in the absence of the Judaistic religion of Judaism passing through generation. And the same could be true of whites. White Christians could be in a certain way due to their genetics rather than to their acceptance of Jesus Jesus Christ, and I believe that this is true for any race, you can have continuation of behaviors even independently from the cultural programs that people are brought into, and that's where race science provides something that strict cultural analysis cannot provide: a continuation after a rejection of certain ideological structure, of certain behaviors.
All right, I have a question for you.
Yep.
Are Jews white?
My answer to that is that they are white from the color sense. If you talk of the color of their skin, they are white. But when I talk of white Europeans, I exclude the Jewish people because they are genetically distinct.
Okay, you exclude them, but I think everyone would say that Jews are white. I mean, you're changing the definition of white. White is basically skin color, isn't it?
Well, no, to me, when I say white, I'm talking of white European. When I talk of the race, I'm talking of the European genes that form a cluster that is separate from the Jewish people.
Well, I mean, I just gave a talk in Bavaria, and allowed me to go through Bavaria. And what is Bavaria? What is it?
What is Bavaria?
Is it white people? Is it white people, or is it Catholic? I mean, it's obviously a combination of both, right? I mean, basically what happened here is I've said this in Iran many times, okay? The Iranians were philosophers and astronomers when my ancestors were chasing pigs through the forest of Germany. Okay, what happened to Germany? What happened to Germany? Why aren't they still just chasing pigs through the forest? The answer is Saint Benedict and the Benedictine monks who brought Catholicism to my barbaric German ancestors and taught them how to work. Ora et labora was the motto of the Benedictines. I rode down the Danube with a bunch of Germans. I speak fluent German. I lived in Germany. I'm even genetically half German, okay? But the point here is you go down the Danube River and you see all of these Benedictine monasteries. They're the people that they're the people that brought civilization to Germany. If I was in Africa, I was invited to Tanzania by the Bishop of Musoma to write a biography of Julius Nyerere. Okay, so I spent time there, and in the course of my research, I discovered that the Diocese of Würzburg has a partnership with the Diocese of Mbinga, which is the next diocese over from Musoma. Okay, and you open the brochure, and there's the Diocese of Mbinga, founded 1987. And there's the Diocese of Würzburg, founded 830. What's the difference here? The difference between Musoma, Mbinga, and Bavaria and Würzburg, the Diocese of Würzburg, is 1,000 years of Christian culture. 1,000 years of teaching people how to work, which is the main thing, ora labora, how to sublimate all of your how to have passion subjugated to reason, how to have reason, how to allow reason to control your passions, and build a culture that is, I think, one of the greatest achievements I've ever seen in the world. And I've traveled all around the world. I mean, the perfect meeting between nature and culture that you find at a place like the Königssee, when you sail along that lake and head toward the church, is something that is one of the greatest achievements on earth. And it's the result of this ethnic group submitting itself to Logos. I don't see any other explanation.
All right, let's move on to other. I have my own responses that I may give in a separate video, but let's move on to other questions because there's lots of questions coming from the crowd. Patty McGill says, please speak to why usury is bad, and if there are alternatives to usury, what are they and how would they work? Everyone must subscribe to Culture Wars magazine. It's amazing, as are John's book. Indeed, I've put the link in the description of the video below for our viewers. Culture Wars. There is the November issue, for example, that is right now available. You can go at culturewars.com to read regularly from E. Michael Jones. Now, on the question of usury, why is it bad?
Usury is bad because it's based on compound interest. And compound interest is something that is a trap that can never be resolved. It creates economic problems that can never be resolved. All you have to do is study the geometric curve that is basically compound interest. It's a geometric curve will start off kind of gradual, and then it shoots up, and that shoots up at around the 70th year in terms of compound interest. So what at this point it shoots up, that means that every single loan is unrepayable given a certain amount of time. Given a certain amount of time. And the best example, I cover this in my book, Baron Metal, A History of Capitalism as the Conflict Between Labor and Usury. The best example I can give is the Fugger family, which were the bankers of Europe during the time of the Reformation, during the 16th century. And they started lending money to the Habsburgs at the end of the 15th century, around 1494. During the next 50 years, the Habsburgs came into the possession of every single gold and silver mine in the New World. And a literal river of gold started pouring into their coffers. They were the richest people in Europe because of this gold and silver, and they went bankrupt. Why did they go bankrupt? They went bankrupt in, I believe it was 1557. How can you go bankrupt? The Fuggers used to pride themselves on the fact that they never charged more than 6% interest. The typical Jewish interest was 43.33% per year. That's what the Jews charge normal people. That means you'll never get out of debt. And the proof you'll never get out of debt is that the Habsburgs couldn't get out of debt at 6% interest because even owning every gold and silver mine in the New World, because compound interest is not natural, it's unrepayable, and you can't, it will wreck any economy where you allow it to free reign.
Absolutely. Compound interest is a mathematical phenomenon that is impressive in its simplicity, and yet it leads to infinite numbers. It goes exponential. It's absolutely insane. Gulielmus Rosus says, John Paul II kissed a Koran, entered a Jewish synagogue, never proselytized all his many Jewish friends, allowed pagan sacrifices at the 1986 Assisi prayer event. Is he a saint or apostate anti-pope? These questions are higher than what I can handle.
Who am I? Who am I to say he's not a saint?
All right, the dashing.
Answer that question.
These questions have a level of intelligence and complexity that I've never seen, even on the public space, which is a pretty high level intellectual show. These guys have very precise questions, and it's fascinating. The Dashing Rogue says, Mr. Jones, Ashkenazi Jews are not Jews, they are Indo-Aryans. Also, can you explain the differences, if any, from Tanakh Judaism versus Rabbinic Judaism?
No, I don't know what that word means. I've never heard that word. Tanakh Judaism. Never heard it. Sorry.
All right. No problem. Connor says, Dr. Jones, what is the origin of the Star of David?
Don't know.
All right. Mark Nadman says, is Dr. Jones familiar with Pope Paul IV teaching that the cardinals should someday elect a heretic and the faithful would have to reject him as an anti-pope? In Comex Apostolatus Officio.
No.
No. I don't know how these questions are so precise, but in fact, I wouldn't know either. Victor L. says, do you have any thoughts on the book, The Plot Against the Church? Do we know who the bishops and cardinals that contributed to the book are, and why did its mission fail?
Who wrote The Plot Against the Church? Maybe. Who is the author of that?
I do not know. It seems that it is an unknown anonymous author within the church. Oh no, Maurice Pinet.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Okay. All right. Yeah. We're talking about a crisis around the time of the Vatican Council and the attempt by the Jews to subvert the council. Uh, this this was exposed by the Comte de Poncin with a book that he wrote at around the same time, exposing Jules Isaac and the all of the horrible stuff that he had written about the church. It eventually turned the Council Fathers against the statement on the Jews that had been proposed by through the machinations of Malachi Martin, who was an agent of the Jews at this time. So the end result was that the church did affirm the traditional teaching of the church, even if in a negative sense, saying the Jews wanted to be exonerated from deicide by a council document. The church finally said not all Jews at the time of Christ were responsible for his death. Well, that having studied logic, I can say that that means the same thing as some Jews at the time of his death were responsible for his death. Okay? And that means we're probably going to exclude the Blessed Mother and St. John because they probably did not yell crucify him when they stood at the foot of the cross. So it's just a a reiteration of the traditional teaching of the church in a way that was trying to be ironic to the Jews. The problem with Nostra Aetate is a statement. There's a statement that says the church condemns all forms of anti-Semitism. What does that mean? Do you realize how many forms of anti-Semitism we have now? Does that mean that the church has to support the ADL's definition of anti-Semitism or the United States State Department definition of anti-Semitism? This just shows that all church documents have to be interpreted in light of tradition. And what the church fathers meant to say was that the racial determinist notion of anti-Semitism that was created toward the end of the 19th century by people like Wilhelm Marr, in other words, any form of biological determinism, is antithetical to the Catholic faith. That's what they meant by anti-Semitism.
All right, we have a very interesting question from Kami Ju. He says, would Dr. Jones rather live in a country of European descent Protestants or a 100% African Catholic country? Careful, because we may pay you a plane ticket if you say that you would like to live in the African country.
First of all, where is this Protestant? The Protestant countries, as I said, I explained, they have squandered the Christian patrimony. Why did I mention Bavaria? Because Bavaria has not squandered that Protestant patrimony. Okay, that patrimony took 1,000 years to create. 1,000 years of uninterrupted Catholicism in Bavaria led to that great cultural achievement. We cannot say that about Protestant countries. Go to England. Go to England and you can see bare ruined choirs. That was Wordsworth's poem about the looting that had gone on that the English couldn't even talk about. Now, when you go to an African country, you're talking about a group of people who never invented the wheel, just lived in a completely isolated situation, if you're talking about, obviously, sub-Saharan Africa, where Logos took a long time to penetrate. So I don't know is that their fault? That they were victimized by Arab slave traders on one side of the continent and European slave traders on the other. Whatever it is, they just were at a disadvantage. So, Lake Victoria is a beautiful lake. I sat there and watched the sun go down on Lake Victoria, but they don't have the cultural patrimony that the Bavarians had because they've got 30 years of Catholicism as opposed to 1,000 years of Catholicism. And to compound that whole situation, you have a guy like Julius Nyerere, who was a Catholic, devout Catholic in a sense, who basically became the first president of Tanzania, and to his credit, preserved that country from all of the violence that swept through other countries during this period of time. And I think that was attributable to his Catholicism to a large extent. But he just told the missionaries, we don't need you anymore. Well, that was a bad move. I was at this Ujamaa village in Kamuga in Tanzania. I met a Polish priest who told me there's only one thing worse than socialism, and that's African socialism. And African socialism basically led to these Ujamaa villages. And I met the missionary who built the pump. He's 92 years old. He's living in Maryknoll, New York. I was there doing research. I went into his room at the nursing home there, and I said, the pump in Kamuga is broken. He said, well, I'd fix it if I were there. And I said, yeah, but you're not there. And that's the problem. They did not have these skills. And Nyerere made a mistake by telling the Maryknoll missionaries to go home. That was a big mistake. But what I'm saying here is it takes a long time to build up a culture. And it's not just one person who does it. And if you have you have the prerequisites, if you have a Catholic culture, which they do in Musoma, there's a deep Catholic culture, but they're going to have to take time. And one of the things that they're going to have to learn is how to work. You know, they don't use labor effectively in places like this. They don't know how to fix pumps. They don't know a lot of things that they need to know. And it's going to take time, and it's going to take the collaboration of the culture. Now, to say that the Protestants, what are we talking about Protestants here? Protestants, I don't want to offend anybody here, okay? But Protestants are basically parasites. They're parasites on Catholic culture. They took over a Catholic culture in the 16th century in places like England, and they looted it. They privatized it. They stole the property of the church that was used for the benefit of the poor, and they stole it. And if you want a first-hand account, you can read Shakespeare. Between the lines, Shakespeare understood this. And so let me say one more thing here. I'm in Washington, D.C., okay? And there's Mr. Tyndall, the founder of the British National Party, okay? The National Front. And he's talking to me, to all of us, about what a great thing it is to be a white guy. And okay, people assume I'm a white guy, even though I'm biracial. But anyway, so he says, to show you how great it was, think of Elizabethan England. And so I look at my friend Jerry, who is also Irish. I'm half Irish. He's Irish. And we're thinking, wait a minute. Isn't Elizabethan England the time with, if you were a priest and you showed up and got caught saying mass, they would hang you until you weren't dead, and then they'd cut your body into 4 pieces and boil that in oil? That's people like me. I'm a Catholic. They were my people that were being this. So what's so great about being a white guy? Okay? And so he says, Mr. Tyndall, are the Irish white? Of course they're white, he says. My mother's Irish. And then he says, and then Sam Francis is sitting next to him. He's a white guy from the South. I understand why people from the South consider themselves white guys. But Sam says, are the Jews white? And Tyndall says, I don't know. Well, this is the crisis here. You've got a complete vacuum. You've got a complete misunderstanding of the parasitic nature of Protestantism and the devastating effect it had on European culture, the division it created. Capitalism is the result of Protestantism, because the English and the Dutch created enclaves that were beyond the police power of the Catholic Church. And that we have Protestantism to thank for capitalism and all the predatory nature of that thing to this day. So this is what I'm trying to get back to you. It was parasitic. When you talk about a Protestant country, you're talking about a Catholic patrimony that was looted for the benefit of a few people.
All right. Well, very interesting answer. It's already been 1 hour. And so what I'll do is I'll be continuing the episode alone, because I have some announcement to do to the audience concerning the show. But Michael Jones, it was really a pleasure talking to you, and you are very energetically defending your position, and everyone really appreciated it on the chat. Lots of people are laughing. Lots of people are applauding. Your presence has been extremely welcome by our audience. And you have a list of book, a catalog of book that you offer at culturewars.com. Some of it is about the Jewish people. Some of it is about influences on modern conceptions of sexuality and gender. I recommend highly to all of our audience to go see the catalog of books that are extremely interesting, including, of course, The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit, the book that we've been talking about today, which has been published 10 years ago, and which is one of the foundational books for understanding the Jewish people today. Did you have any words in conclusion to tell to our crowd?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I enjoyed being on. Good luck in your work.
Thank you very much for coming. Have a great day.
You too.